We share these streets. True tales of everyday folk in bygone Nottingham. Episode 5. Wilf. It's hard to imagine now, but for about 7 decades there was a train station right in the heart of the city centre called Nottingham Victoria. The platforms were all underground and occupied the space under what is now Victoria Centre. The main building with its booking hall sat between the clock tower and hotel you can still see on Milton Street, and both were part of the station complex. From the booking hall passengers would take steps down to the platforms, which were where the underground car park is now. A public footpath connected Milton Street and Glasshouse Street via a bridge, and it became a popular activity for kids to peer over the wall at the trains below. To the north, a tunnel ran under and along Mansfield Road, emerging at what in 2020 is the site of the Open University building at the Goose Fair roundabout. To the south, a tunnel ran directly under Thurland Street, across Victoria Street, and emerged just below the Weekday Cross Road junction. An art gallery, the Nottingham Contemporary, occupies the space in 2020. A second entrance to the platforms was built from Lower Parliament Street, where the facade of Boots is in 2020, roughly below where the old footbridge meets Victoria Centre. From there, passengers could take stairs down to the platforms. The station opened without agreement on the name. It was a joint venture between 2 railway companies and was known variously as Nottingham Joint Station, Nottingham Central, and, worst of all, Great Central and Great Northern Joint Central Station. I doubt that last one would even fit on a railway ticket at the time. The name Victoria was suggested by the town clerk as the station's planned opening was on the 24th of May 1900, the 81st birthday of Queen Victoria. The suggestion was quickly accepted. Nottingham Victoria is fondly remembered as one of the grand cathedrals of steam, a station whose architectural flamboyance and flourishes went far beyond the mere function of the location. Within the station were 2 turntables to reorientate engines, 2 engine pits for maintenance, a water tank, stores for plate layers, plumbers and signal fitters, as well as areas to keep supplies of salt, oil, sand and bricks. There was a horse and carriage dock, a lamp room, a fitter's shop and a hydraulic powerhouse. There were 12 platforms in total, and these included refreshment rooms and eateries, a telegraph office, toilets, waiting rooms for different classes, the station master's office and a bookstall. The whole station site covered around 13.5 acres. Whilst thousands of people over the decades took trains to and from the station, one local enjoyed a completely unique experience of Nottingham Victoria. That was Wilf from Robin Hood Chase in St Anne's. Wilf signed up for military service in 1930 when he was aged just 16 and served in France and Germany. He was part of Operation Dynamo, the famous evacuation of seemingly doomed Belgian, British and French troops from Dunkirk in 1940. We believe Wilf married Florence in 1938 before the couple had a daughter, Carol, in 1943. He was demobbed and came back to Nottingham when World War II ended, and the couple, clearly pleased to see each other, had a son, Dennis, the following year. Wilf had started at Victoria Station as a labourer in 1945. Work in those days was hard to find, and many at Victoria were employed on a casual basis, but then released with very little notice if they weren't required. There must have been something about Wilf, though, because he secured a permanent position. He went on to have spells as a guard on both goods trains and passenger trains with the Great Western Railway, but always came back to Victoria. In its heyday, Victoria Station employed porters, announcers, cleaners, managers, clerks, guards, admin staff, package handlers and hospitality staff in its refreshments rooms. By the 1960s though, the number of people using trains was dropping and stations faced the risk of closure. In 1963 a report was published by the British Railway Board entitled The Reshaping of British Railways, which identified over 2,000 stations for closure. Nottingham Victoria was one of these. Over the next few years, services to and from the station were reduced and staff were let go. The plans for what would replace Victoria seemed to change with each new council meeting, and there was a long period of limbo. From the start of July 1967, the only person working at the 13-acre train station was Wilf. An uncredited reporter for the Nottingham Evening Post ran Wilf's story as the station ground to a halt in a beautifully poetic article. The article described Victoria Station as a kind of ghost. To thousands it is a ghost of nostalgia. To the economists it is a ghost of failure. The article describes Wilf's only company in the station being birds in the girders high above the platforms, or passengers using the services to and from Rugby on platform 6. About a dozen trains going between Nottingham and Rugby each day constituted the only passenger service still operating up until the station's full closure. Wilf is quoted as saying, "I'm going to miss the regulars, really miss them," as he stood among rusting railings, platforms peppered with weeds, and cobwebbed windows of deserted waiting rooms and staff offices. The article highlights that when passengers do arrive, Wilf has very little to do anyway, since tickets can be punched or dispensed by conductors on the trains. "I've just got to look after it," he says of the station with what the reporter describes as justifiable vagueness. The article goes on to lament, "There is no point in him cleaning the thick dust and cobwebs from the windows through which nobody wants to look. There is no point in him tearing up the weeds from the platforms which are never to be used again, and which are themselves going to be torn up in the near future." The Evening Post article featured a photograph of Wilf walking away from the camera along the tracks towards the station buildings. Ahead and to the right, the Milton Street clock tower peeps over the station roof, and more immediately to the right is a curved ramp, echoed in 2020 by a contemporaneous incline behind a pub on Mansfield Road. In modern terms, the spot where Wilf is walking in the photograph is at the lowest car parking level deep beneath House of Fraser. Those days must have been strange for Wilf, roaming the empty station. I wonder if he had an interest in photography and if there's a shoebox in an attic somewhere filled with photographs of the old station. I'd love to see them. There are pictures of Nottingham Victoria, of course, but photographs taken during the hustle and bustle of everyday life have compromises. The photographer has to avoid getting in people's way, so the possible viewpoints are restricted. Wilf wouldn't have had that concern and could have photographed to his heart's content. It's probably wishful thinking on my part. Maybe he just appreciated the quiet and solitude after his military days and enjoyed his strangely serene time in Victoria. Nottingham Victoria closed its doors to passengers on the 4th of September 1967. The 5:34 to Rugby was the last train to use the station. The Guardian Journal ran a photograph of the train driver, George Chambers, pictured with his grandchildren just before departing. I imagine Wilf would have been just out of shot, having said goodbye to his beloved regulars as they boarded. Wilf was transferred to Carlton and Netherfield Station, which is still operational now but just called Carlton Station, where he worked as a relief porter. We lose sight of him after Victoria's closure, but it's possible he passed away in 1993, still in Nottingham. He would have seen a lot of change in his lifetime around the city. Victoria being demolished and replaced by a shopping centre, St Anne's being levelled and rebuilt with a whole new street plan, the demolition of Drury Hill, Middle Hill and Middlemarsh to accommodate the Broadmarsh shopping centre. For those of us interested in local history, they seem like important, pivotal moments, but I wonder if Wilf felt the same. 15 years in the army may have given him a different perspective. Nottingham Victoria was replaced by Victoria Centre Shopping Mall. At the time of recording this in 2020, its future looks uncertain. Retail faces something of a crisis, with online shopping proving a serious rival to real-world shops. The coronavirus lockdown has been a further serious blow to both shops and restaurants. The company that owned Victoria Centre went into administration in June 2020. Bearing this in mind, the article on Wilf and Victoria Station in the Nottingham Evening Post closes on a potentially prophetic note. No one knows when this ghost will be demolished to pave the way for the ambitious commercial development which has been planned, but everyone hopes that development will not, in 60 years' time, be deemed to be such a white elephant, albeit such a lovable one.